It's been 7 long years since Samurai Warriors 4 released, and over 5 since the spin-off Samurai Warriors Spirit of Sonata. With so many other Warriors games having been released in the meantime, along with basically an entire console generation, I was fairly excited to see what new things would be added in by Koei Tecmo. Not to mention, the Warriors franchise as a whole is more popular than it's ever been, with Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity selling the most copies of any Warriors game to date last year. With more eyes on the franchise than ever, I feel like now is the best time to get people who enjoyed some of the bigger spin-off games into some of the other Warriors series like Samurai Warriors. I'm a huge fan of the Warriors games, and the Samurai Warriors series is one of my favorites in the franchise. But despite being a huge fan, I will go over everything to see if it's worth playing for both new and existing fans. If you do enjoy the video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more gaming news, reviews, and discussions. With that said, let's get into it. And there's a lot to go over considering Samurai Warriors 5 is basically a reboot, changing up visuals more than ever before along with combat and story changes. So to start off, if you are brand new to the franchise, before you ask, no, you do not need to play older games in the series to know what's going on in 5. While there are some differences in the story game to game, it is essentially historical fiction and a retelling of the Sengoku period of Japan. However, Samurai Warriors 5 is somewhat of a soft reboot of the franchise, and Koei Tecmo decided to mostly focus on Oda Nobunaga and Matsuda Akechi. And before we go any further, I am definitely going to mispronounce names. I am very sorry. I will do my best. It's split into 2 campaigns, one for each main character, although it would be probably more accurate to say it's the same campaign with slightly different viewpoints. Normally I have to worry about spoilers, but I mean, you can just read Nobunaga's Wikipedia page and you'll get the story. However, while it's based on historical figures, it is heavily dramatized, and there's quite a bit of, let's call it, artistic interpretation of what happened. It's an extremely chaotic period in history with many powerful lords clashing for control of Japan. You have alliances, bitter rivals, betrayals, military geniuses, giant battles, and basically everything else you'd want to make an interesting story except it actually happened. For those who have played previous games, the story has been changed up in certain areas, and some characters are very different from past games. I think they did this because while they can't really change what happens in major events, they can change smaller details to keep things fresh for longtime players. For those unaware, it tells the story of how Nobunaga rose to power in an attempt to unify Japan. There were many powerful daimyo, basically Japan's feudal lord equivalent, vying for power, and one daimyo, Nobunaga, started off controlling a smaller territory, with quite a bit of dissent in his clan over him being the leader. While it doesn't go into too much detail, and I wish it did, he used a combination of superior technology, military tactics, and guerrilla warfare to defeat his enemies, many of whom had equal or larger armies than his. Basically, he decided to bring guns to a sword fight and, well, the guns won. The game through the 2 campaigns shows Nobunaga's and Akechi's friendship blossom and then sour due to Nobunaga's increasingly aggressive behavior. Nobunaga and No's relationship is also a central part of the plot, and it's portrayed differently this time around, which will give longtime fans something different to enjoy. That being said, I do think the production value leaves a lot to be desired. But I do think it's a step up this time around compared to Samurai Warriors 4, and it kept me engaged for far longer. It is still very exposition heavy, but I do think they had some legitimately good ideas for certain story beats. Maybe someday they'll raise the production value, and I hope they do because it's a very interesting point in history, and if told right, it could be a very interesting tale to witness. Although I feel like most people play these games for the combat anyways and just skip the cutscenes. But for those interested in it like myself, it's a mostly fine experience, and there's some new elements to the story that might interest longtime players to see something different this time around. For people looking forward to co-op and online play, it is available in the campaigns, although with some caveats. For starters, you can't do local co-op until a few missions in, and certain ones seem to be only one player only, although the vast majority do seem to have co-op available. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone to test out local co-op with, but from what I've seen online, people are having fun with it, but confused as to why you can't play every mission together from the get-go. Unfortunately, when it comes to online play, it's only available in free mode, which means you will have to beat the campaign first and then replay the levels if you want to play them online. I really am at a loss as to why this is the case. It seems like a huge portion of the player base plays online co-op, and I'm not sure why you can't just play through the game with a friend online from the start. Maybe they'll update it since it's already a heavily requested feature, but there's no word yet on if they will do that or not. But at least from when I tested out the online, it works seamlessly, although I do think the UI could have been designed much better. When it comes to the visual changes, I have to say when I first saw them, I really didn't like them, but they did eventually win me over. Characters now have a cel-shaded aesthetic and sort of an anime look to them. And while there were a few missteps, for the most part, I think the changes to the majority of the characters were very well done. In fact, I vastly prefer some of the redesigns to the previous models. Some characters do look the same, but others like Montanari, Shingen, and Hishari look fantastic while keeping the gist of their previous identities. Nobunaga and Mitsuti's appearances also won me over, and I think I prefer them to the older character models. Not that I dislike the old ones, but it is a nice, fresh new look. As I mentioned earlier, there are some issues with a few of the character models, but I will go over that later in the review. The roster was trimmed down to 37 playable characters, which is a bit less than the 55 from Samurai Warriors 4. However, the story is focused on a shorter period in history, so it does make sense that the roster is a bit smaller. I do wish there were more, but at the same time I still felt like there was enough variety and plenty of characters to choose from. I grew to really like the new character designs, and as I mentioned earlier, some looked fantastic, although there were two characters that stood out as baffling design choices. They were Yashu and Hideyoshi, and I have no idea why or how they came up with their designs. Ieyasu went from a buff, battle-hardened warrior to an 11-year-old, and I have no words for Hideyoshi. If you like it, that's fine, they just did not work for me at all. Also, Nobunaga and Mitsuti aged during the campaign, but the rest of the cast does not, which again was a baffling choice and fairly awkward when they age in the story but everyone else stays the same age. It was a great concept, and if they had done it for the entire roster, I think it would have been a really great game design choice. But as it stands, it does become very awkward when you have characters that look like they're 11 and then others that look like they're in their 50s. Along with those two changes, there's also some combat tweaks, mostly things we've seen in other Warriors games being ported over. While I do think there's a lot to like in Samurai Warriors 5, I do think some of the changes might be divisive amongst longtime fans. Although most things are the same, as you still have your standard attacks, hyper attacks, combos, Muso attacks, and rage mode to blast through enemies with. Instead of each character having unique moveset and weapon, every character can use any one of 15 weapons. That being said, each character does have a preferred weapon which will have a unique extra ability added to certain combos. Muso attacks are still unique and they give each character a sense of identity. The biggest change is that they added in ultimate skills, which are similar to the abilities in Dragon Quest Heroes and Assassin's Creed Odyssey where you hold down a bumper button and hit a face button to pull them off. They range from buffs to your attack to massive attacks that can clear out hundreds of enemies at a time. Each character will have their own special unique skill as well once you unlock it from their skill tree. Outside of that, the hack and slash combat is as good as ever, if not the best it's ever been. The skills give another layer to the combat, and I think it was a great addition. And you will have to use them strategically as there's special enemy troops that will block hyper attacks, so you have to use your skills to get through them. Also, enemy captains will charge up special attacks and using an ultimate skill will interrupt it, so you have to make sure you have one available because on harder difficulties, these stronger attacks can literally one-shot you. Overall, I think the combat has improved while retaining what makes the Warriors game so addictive. As I mentioned earlier, there's a skill tree for each character. It's similar to what we've seen in the past, but I do think it's one of the better implementations of it. It mostly unlocks extra stats, but it can also unlock additional Muso gauges and a unique ultimate skill for each character. And certain abilities like taking reduced damage from enemy captains and gunfire are practically required for hard and nightmare difficulties, as enemy captains can take you out in just a few hits even with those abilities. There's also a weapon skill system. Basically, as you use a weapon, you unlock stat bonuses and extra ultimate skills and combos for that weapon. It's a fairly straightforward system, and I personally have always liked the idea of as your character uses a weapon, they become more proficient with it. Level design is one of the more hit or miss areas of the game. Bad news first, the levels are essentially the same as from Samurai Warriors 4, which might not necessarily be a bad thing for everyone, but I had been really hoping they would update the level layout like we had seen in other Warriors games. For instance, I thought Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was a huge step in the right direction as far as level design goes. We had some large maps that felt open and started off with big battlefields as you worked your way into a castle fighting through room after room and enemy after enemy. And while I know Dynasty Warriors 9 is generally not well liked, I have consistently seen fans say despite that, they still loved the way enemy castles were laid out and having the freedom to move around was a positive change. Levels in Samurai Warriors 5 feel somehow cramped and at the same time overly large. Most are gigantic labyrinth-like narrow paths filled with invisible walls. Don't get me wrong, there's some levels that I absolutely loved, but I think it's time for Koei Tecmo to really update how they create levels, as I feel the game would greatly benefit from a sense of verticality and openness. But that being said, I feel like they made use of what they had available maybe better than they have ever before. The enemy layout is maybe the best I've seen in the series, as there's some really tough sections that were just so much fun to go through. There's kill zone traps you can walk into where you stumble into a room thinking you're going to slaughter the enemy troops, only to realize you're surrounded by gunmen and then you take gunfire from every angle. That, along with the use of the special shieldmen and spearmen that block hyper attacks, led to some really interesting level layouts, and I want to see more of this in the future alongside an updated level design mentality. Outside of the Muso or story mode, there's one other mode called Citadel Mode. It again reminded me a lot of Dragon Quest Heroes. You get to control 2 heroes and have to defend multiple points from enemy troops and captains. You can spawn your own troops as well to hold down a position while you hunt down objectives and enemy captains. Depending on your score, you're rewarded with extra experience and materials. The materials are used to upgrade your castle, which has 4 buildings like a stables, blacksmith, and a shop. The weird thing is that these buildings are shared between both modes, but you can only gain materials to upgrade from Citadel Mode, which means if you want to upgrade your buildings, which the vast majority of people will want to do so they can upgrade their weapons and get better items, then you will have to stop the story mode and go grind in Citadel Mode. It was a fun gameplay mode, but it took way too long to grind materials to upgrade buildings, especially for their final level. You can also develop bonds with characters only in this mode, which will unlock a short cutscene between the characters. Okay, so let's go over what worked and what didn't. Like I said, I thought the additions to the combat were overall well done, and I hope they are here to stay going forward. The combat was as addicting as ever, and I thought Samurai Warriors 5 provided some of the best challenges the series has to offer so far. Especially in Hard and Nightmare difficulty, the enemy troops are far more aggressive than I have seen in past games, which for me personally is a good thing. I was personally okay with the change to generic weapons instead of unique ones. The combos were all well done, and it was really nice to actually be able to always remember how to perform them, instead of having to memorize 50 plus unique combinations. The one thing combat-wise I really wanted changed is a dedicated dodge button. After playing multiple other Warrior spin-offs with one, it was sorely missed, and the hold block and hit a directional button to sidestep has never felt good. The story, while leaving a lot to be desired, was at least a step in the right direction. That said, I do think they need to go back to the drawing board again and fundamentally change how they tell the story and find a way to increase its production value in future games. Musically speaking, there were a few really amazing tracks, especially later on. That being said, while the overall quality of the soundtrack is good, I feel like we have heard better in other Warriors titles. The lack of an English dub is also very disappointing, and not having one eliminates a huge potential audience, as many people will not want to read subtitles. And the levels are still very dialogue heavy, however, it shows it in small text at the bottom of the screen during battles. This makes it basically impossible to experience parts of the story that are told during the levels. I have no idea why they still do this, and there's no way that they are unaware it's an issue. They simply do not care. Also, there's no PS5 or Xbox Series S or X version. The new consoles have been out for almost a year, and PlayStation 5 alone has sold over 10 million units. They really should have made next-gen versions. With the Warriors franchise more popular than ever, you would think they would want to make the best effort possible to try and gain more fans. I know it's a lower budget game, but it still feels cheaper than it should be. At least they are starting to make the right moves to bring the franchise forward, but there's still a long way to go. It just frustrates me so much because I see the amazing potential these games have, but Koei Tecmo just seems unwilling to take a full step forward. Or at least not willing unless Nintendo or Square Enix is bankrolling them. While we did see some slight combat updates, and they were positive ones, there's still a lot of work to do. Fighting enemy captains still needs considerable work. There's no dedicated dodge button, the camera is among the worst I've ever seen, and everything just still feels too floaty and there's just not enough collision detection. Tack on the insanely overpriced season pass that gives you next to nothing, and it starts to feel a little insulting. It's been 2 console generations since Samurai Warriors 4, and this was the best they could do? We know they can and have done better with other games in the Warriors franchise, so again, it's frustrating to see the wasted potential. I'm gonna stop myself there because I could go on forever. I just wish they would really put the effort in and make the games be the best they can possibly be. What annoys me the most though is that I still had a ton of fun with the game and will continue to do so, but I hate wondering what could have been if they had really put the effort in to move the franchise forward. This is why competition is so important in gaming. I do not see Koei Tecmo changing their ways unless another developer comes along and makes high quality games similar to the Warriors ones that sell well. The only thing publishers respond to is a hit to their wallet, sadly. I know it's been attempted before, but if this did happen, it would mean better and higher quality games to choose from for us all. Okay, with all that said, I'm going to give Samurai Warriors 5 a 6.8 out of 10. It's a ton of fun, and if you're a fan of the franchise, I'm sure you will have a good time with it. And if you're someone who is new to the Warriors games, maybe you've played Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity or Persona 5 Strikers and enjoyed it, and you're looking for a similar game to play, then this is a good option for you as well. I do think it's a step up from Samurai Warriors 4, but it feels like a half step instead of a full step. And if you're someone who typically does not enjoy the Warriors games, then I don't see this one doing enough differently to win you over. But if you are curious about the Warriors games, I would highly recommend starting with Fire Emblem Warriors or Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. And then if you do enjoy those games, then I would say check out Samurai Warriors 5 after that. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I have a ton of videos in the works, and my next review will be for the Godfall Fire and Darkness DLC expansion. So I will have that review out as soon as I possibly can after it releases. I also want to do more video essays about certain gaming topics, so make sure you're subscribed to see those videos as soon as they come out, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this review. Thanks so much for watching, see you all in the next video.